We're living in the loneliest era in recorded history. People have more contacts, more followers, more group chats than any generation before them, and yet they've never felt more unseen. And somewhere in your life, there's one of these people, someone who just disappeared. No fight, no dramatic exit, no closure. They didn't block you, they didn't post anything. They just quietly removed themselves from your life, from everyone's life, like they were never really there to begin with. Maybe it was a friend, maybe a family member, maybe someone you thought you knew better than that. And from the outside, the interpretation is always the same. Something is wrong with them. Maybe you've even said it yourself. They have issues, they can't handle real relationships, something must have happened to them. Or maybe, and this is where it gets interesting, maybe you're like this too. Maybe you're the one who's been quietly doing the math on the people around you, and you've never quite had the language for why. The world has names for people like this: cold, damaged, broken, emotionally unavailable, unable to commit, unable to connect, unable to let anyone in. We pathologize it, we diagnose it, we feel sorry for them.
Or we resent them for leaving. And what this video is going to show you is that the people who cut everyone off have developed a specific kind of psychological intelligence that most people never reach, because most people are too afraid of what it would cost them socially to even consider it. If any of this feels familiar, this video is exactly where you need to be. By the end of this, the way you see these people will be completely different, and so might the way you see yourself. Here's the first thing nobody tells you about people who cut everyone off. They're not avoiding relationships. They're extremely good at them. Think about that for a second. The person you assumed couldn't handle connection is often the one who felt it the deepest, the one who gave the most, noticed the most, remembered the most, the one who could read a room better than anyone in it. The psychological term for what most people call coldness is actually hypervigilant relational processing. These people aren't tuned out. They're tuned in so precisely that they pick up signals most people walk past without ever noticing the slight change in tone, the pattern in how someone shows up when things get hard, the gap between what a person says and what they consistently do. They don't cut people off because they stopped caring. They cut people off because they cared enough to pay attention. And attention, over time, gives you data, and data eventually becomes a conclusion. Think about the friend you had who seemed totally fine, and then one day was just gone from someone's life, and you found out later that person had been lying to them for 2 years, or taking without giving.
Or showing up only when they needed something. The person who left? They knew. They'd known for a while. They just waited until the data was undeniable. That's not someone who can't connect. That's someone who connects so well, they can see exactly what a relationship actually is, not what they wish it was. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because if these people are so emotionally intelligent, why does cutting people off feel so cold to everyone watching? Why does it look like cruelty from the outside when it's something else entirely from the inside? The answer to that lives in something researchers discovered about how the human brain actually processes other people. And once you understand this, you'll never look at social behavior the same way again. Your brain is not a feeling machine. It's a prediction machine. Every single person you've ever met, your brain has been quietly building a model of how they behave under pressure, whether their actions match their words, how they make you feel after you leave them. Not during, after. Your nervous system is running calculations on every relationship you have every single day, without you ever consciously deciding to. Now here's what's different about people who cut everyone off. They listen to those calculations. Most people override them.
They feel the discomfort after spending time with someone, and they explain it away. They feel the exhaustion, the low-grade dread before a phone call, the relief when plans get canceled, and they tell themselves that's normal, that relationships are just hard sometimes, that they should try more, give more, be more understanding. People who cut everyone off don't do that. They treat the signal as information. And the science behind this is more physical than most people realize. Being around someone who consistently costs you emotionally is not just a feeling, it's a physiological event. Your cortisol spikes, your heart rate variability drops, your sleep degrades. Researchers have found that high conflict or emotionally unpredictable relationships create the same stress markers in the body as a low-grade chronic illness. The people who cut everyone off aren't being antisocial. On a biological level, they're being self-preserving. You felt this. Think about the last time you spent a few hours with someone who drains you, and afterwards you needed an hour alone just to feel like yourself again. Now imagine that person is in your closest circle. Imagine that recovery cost is happening every week, quietly, for years. Some people reach a point where they do the math and decide the return isn't worth the withdrawal, and they stop. Not dramatically, not with a speech. They just stop. That's not damaged. That's someone who finally started taking their own energy seriously. Now, everything we've talked about so far assumes these people are all operating from the same place, but they're not. And this distinction, this one specific difference, is what separates the people who cut others off and eventually find peace from the ones who do it and end up more alone and more confused than when they started. Most people have never heard this talked about, and it changes everything. Not everyone who cuts people off is doing it for the same reason. And confusing the two is exactly why this behavior gets misread by the people watching and sometimes by the person doing it themselves. There are two types,
and they look identical from the outside. The first type cuts people off from pain. Something happened, a betrayal, a disappointment, a moment where they felt completely unseen. And the emotional response was so overwhelming that disappearing felt like the only way to survive it. They don't leave after a conclusion. They leave in the middle of a feeling. And because they're leaving to escape something rather than moving towards something, the cut doesn't actually resolve anything. The anger travels with them. The hurt travels with them. And 6 months later, they're thinking about it constantly, replaying conversations, drafting messages they never send. The silence looks the same, but internally, there's nothing quiet about it. The second type cuts people off from clarity. There's no explosion, no defining moment, no single thing that broke them. It's more like a slow accumulation of evidence that finally reached a threshold. They've been watching, processing, giving the benefit of the doubt one more time, and one more time after that. And then one day, without drama, without anger, without needing the other person to understand, they're done. Not because something hurt them, because something became undeniable. The first type cuts in emotion. The second type cuts in silence. The first type is hoping somewhere that the other person will notice and fix it. The second type has already stopped hoping. Not bitterly, just honestly. You can tell them apart by what happens after. The first type will often reappear. They'll come back, reconnect, let the person back in, and the cycle starts again. Because the cut was never really a decision. It was a reaction. And reactions don't hold. The second type almost never comes back. Not because they're cold, but because the decision came after everything else was already exhausted. There's nothing dramatic left to resolve. They're not waiting for an apology. They're not secretly hoping you'll reach out. They've simply moved on. Completely. In a way that most people find unsettling precisely because it's so calm. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most people who get cut off want it to be the first type. Because the first type means there's still a door. The second type means the door was closed quietly, from the inside, a long time before you even noticed it was shut. And this is where the whole conversation shifts. Because everything up until now has been about the person doing the cutting. Their psychology, their patterns, their reasoning. But there's a side of this story that almost nobody wants to look at. What does it mean? Not for one person, not for one relationship, but as a consistent pattern. If someone keeps ending up on the receiving end of this, what does the research actually say about the people who are chronically left? This next part is going to make some people uncomfortable. And that's exactly why it needs to be said.
We've spent this entire video inside the mind of the person who leaves, and everything we've covered paints a pretty clear picture. These are people with high relational awareness, people who process deeply, people who make deliberate decisions most others are too uncomfortable to make. But here's the question nobody asks out loud. If someone cuts one person off, that's a decision. If someone cuts 5 people off, that's a pattern. But if someone looks around and realizes that across their entire life, across different friendships, different cities, different chapters, they are consistently the one being left,
That's information too. And this isn't about blame, this isn't about deciding someone is a bad person. It's about something far more useful than that. It's about pattern recognition working in reverse. Because remember what we said about how the brain builds models of people? How it tracks behavior over time, reads signals, measures the gap between what someone says and what they actually do? The people who cut others off are running that process consciously. But the process itself, that evaluation, is happening in everyone around you all the time, whether they act on it or not. So if the pattern keeps repeating, if the people who leave you are consistently the ones who are most self-aware, most deliberate, most honest about their own energy, it's worth asking a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What are they seeing? This doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means there might be something in the way you show up in relationships. A pattern of taking more than giving, a habit of being consistent only when it's convenient, a tendency to be present during the good and absent during the hard, that the most perceptive people in your life have quietly calculated. And instead of confronting it, they did what they do. They left without a word. The person who ghosted you might not have been running from the relationship. They might have been telling you something in the only language they trust: silence. Most people respond to being cut off by focusing entirely on the person who left. They analyze them, resent them, miss them, try to decode them. The more useful response, and the harder one, is to sit with the question they left behind. And sitting with that question, really sitting with it, requires something most people never actually do. Looking at their own life honestly. Not the version they perform for other people, not the story they've been telling themselves for years. The real one. We live in a world that is constantly pulling your attention outward. More noise, more comparison, more rushing towards something that never quite arrives. And in all of that, the one thing that gets neglected, quietly, consistently, is the conversation you need to have with yourself. That's exactly what the Simple Life Journal was built for. It's not a productivity system, it's not a positivity tool. It's a space for the kind of honesty this video has been talking about. The kind that most people avoid because it asks real questions and actually waits for the answer. The profound changes in how you show up, for yourself, for the people around you, don't come from giant leaps. They come from the simple things you choose to face every single day. If this video made you feel something, if any part of it felt a little too familiar, that feeling is the beginning of something. Don't let it just be a moment you scroll past. The link is below. Take your time with it. Be honest. Face the truth. That's where it actually starts. And that question, if you're honest enough to ask it, leads somewhere that this whole video has quietly been building toward. Because here's the thing about people who cut everyone off. The ones operating from clarity, not from pain. They figured something out. Not about other people, about themselves. They figured out what they actually need from a relationship, what they're actually willing to give, what kind of people make them feel more alive versus what kind slowly make them feel less. And they decided, without guilt, without needing external validation, to organize their lives around that knowledge. Most people never get there. Not because they can't, but because getting there requires a level of honesty about yourself and about others that feels socially like a risk most aren't willing to take. The people who cut everyone off already took it. So the next time someone disappears from your life without a word, or the next time you feel that quiet pull to do it yourself, remember what you now know. This was never about coldness. It was never about being broken. It was about people who learned, sometimes the hard way, to trust what they see over what they wish was true. And in a world where everyone is desperately holding on to connections that are slowly draining them, that kind of honesty is rare. The loneliness epidemic isn't just about having fewer people around you. It's about being surrounded by the wrong ones for too long and never having the courage to admit it. That's the real conversation. And we're just getting started. Because if this video resonated with you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in here on either side of it, there's a lot more where this came from. We're going to keep going deeper into the things people feel, but never say out loud. The patterns nobody names. The truths that make you pause the video and stare at the ceiling for a minute. That's what this channel is built for. So if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit the button, turn on the notification, and come back for the next one. Take care of yourself. Peace.